The path towards reconciliation in Australia has hardly been a smooth one, nor has the path towards recognising in the Constitution Indigenous Australians. Today, a report was handed to the government, a final report, by an expert panel which has been consulting widely on this issue. The government has promised at the last election that it would put this to a referendum, either at the 2013 election or before then. The report recommends Indigenous recognition in the body of the Constitution, not in a preamble, acknowledging Australia was first occupied by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, acknowledging their continuing relationship with traditional lands and waters, and respecting their cultures and languages. The report also recommends removing racial discrimination provisions in the Constitution, but it would still allow laws to overcome disadvantage of any group. Pat Dodson, widely known as the grandfather of reconciliation, he co-chaired this panel, this expert panel, and he summed up the recommendations for us.
We're saying that there should be a non-discrimination clause for all Australians, so no Australian should be discriminated against on the basis of their race, their ethnicity or their nationality. And we're also wanting to make sure that the good laws that have been passed by parliaments in the past, like native title or land rights or other positive acts, that they're not disrupted.
Well, the Prime Minister welcomed the report. She has not made any final commitment here on exactly what the government's response will be and when and what it will put to a referendum. But Julia Gillard does strongly believe in the concept of constitutional recognition.
We learned when Kevin Rudd delivered the apology on behalf of the stolen generations that moment had meaning. It had great meaning, because around the nation Australians said yes to that moment. They wanted the apology said, they wanted it said for them, and Kevin Rudd delivered those beautiful words. So now we are looking to the Australian people again to get involved and to find it in themselves to say yes to change.
The Coalition also backs constitutional recognition for Indigenous Australians. Tony Abbott welcomed the report today, but he did express some reservations.
I think this is quite a significant day. It's quite a significant report. We're going to take the time to study it carefully. We think that it deserves careful study. We have some reservations about anything that might turn out to be a one-clause Bill of Rights, but we accept that millions of Australians' hopes and dreams are resting on constitutional recognition of Indigenous people, and the last thing I want to do is do anything other than welcome this report today.
Well, the report's recommendations have been widely welcomed by Indigenous leaders, but not all are convinced that they've got the recommendations absolutely right. Warren Mundine is a former president of the ALP, and he has previously said that these sort of changes go 100 steps too far and could lead to legal challenges. Warren Mundine joins me now. Thanks for your time. What do you make of the final recommendations in this report?
Look, like the government and the opposition, I'd like to thank the panel for their work. They did a lot of research, a lot of hard work in this. It's now in the government's hands. The government needs to work with the opposition and wider for the Australian community to look at putting up amendments that will get the support of all Australians and move forward. There are certain things that we agree on. We agree on a constitutional amendment that recognises Aboriginal people, that unites the country, but we don't want it to turn into some sort of legal dog breakfast. So let's get it right. Let's move forward on it.
Well, let's go through what's been recommended. Acknowledging that Australia was first occupied by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and acknowledging their continuing relationship with traditional lands and waters, and respecting their cultures and languages. I'm assuming you don't have a problem with any of that part of what's been recommended.
No, look, there's no problem with that. There is probably some questions in regard to the position of it being in a preamble or being in the body of the Constitution. Look,
well, you would rather it be in a preamble, would you?
Well, I'm getting my head around the whole paper now. I've only received it today. I need to get some constitution lawyers myself, sit down and go through it. But, you know, we'll have a look at it. Those words I have no problems with. It's just about where it's placed. Let's get it right and what works best for Australians.
Because then we get to the bit that might be more contentious, and this is removing the racial discrimination provisions which are still in the Constitution, but at the same time allowing laws to be passed that do tackle disadvantage. Is that what you're concerned about?
Well, it's in regard to the advancement word itself. It's a bit vague for me, and I'm not the only one who's in this position. A number of constitutional lawyers have also mentioned that now, that it is vague. So we don't want to be in a situation where it is, every time we try and do something, let's say we want to look at welfare reform where we're moving people into work and off the dole, then we don't want to be up in court having an argument at the High Court about whether that advances Aboriginal people or it doesn't advance them. What we want to do is recognise Aboriginal people, put it simple, make the wording simple, and not let it become, as I said, a legal dog's breakfast where we make a lot of constitutional lawyers and barristers and Queen's counsellors rich. What we want to do is have a proper place for Aboriginal people, Torres Strait Islanders, within the constitutional framework of Australia. Now, as I said, I want to be positive about that. The work that was done by the panel was great. I want to now work with the government and the opposition on it now, because just because the panel's made recommendations to the government doesn't mean that they're going to be the constitutional amendments at the end of the day. But it's a start. Let's work on it. Let's get it right, and let's get it up.
It sounds like you still want to ensure the government, or any government, does have the power under the Constitution to make specific laws for Indigenous Australians. What sort of practical example is there where that would still be an important thing to do?
Well, look, there's a couple of things that we get ourselves into trouble at. I agreed with the preamble, and I agreed with, let's get race out of the Constitution and bring the Constitution out of the 19th century into the 21st century. But we do then run into some problems, especially in 5126, where, makes laws about race. If we take that out, the word is back from constitutional lawyers, and things like the native title legislation, positive discrimination stuff starts to get a bit shaky. So we need to work around that, and whether this is the clause that does it or not, we'll have a look at it, we'll discuss it, and we'll go from there.
What's your best guess of how successful any referendum question would be on this? Do you think it would be passed? I mean, Australians are historically reluctant to change the Constitution. Most referendum questions get knocked off. What do you think on this one? Well,
it's sort of like the bad news, I think, as far as is it's sort of like the Republican constitutional change, in that it has a lot of support. Everyone's very supportive. Look at any polling, it's in support of a constitutional change of adding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and recognition within the Constitution. That was the same thing with the Republican debate, but because of the splits, because of the arguments over sentences and words and that, it went down in flames, as we remember. I don't want that to happen with this one. I want to get that recognition within the Constitution. I want to work with the people on the panel, work with the government and the opposition to get a situation where we live in the political reality of what is acceptable to the wider Australian community.
Well, it's a good point that you make there. Traditionally, referendum questions need bipartisan support of both sides of politics if they are going to succeed. I guess with this question, it's going to need more than bipartisan support. It's going to need unanimous support amongst Indigenous leaders such as yourself. Do you acknowledge that if you or others are out there campaigning against any sort of referendum question on this, it's going to be defeated?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. It will be defeated mainly from the mainstream, from the Aboriginal community. There will be some people on the fringes who will argue against this. They're never going to be happy unless there's complete full sovereignty and all the white fellas have been driven back into the sea. But we need to take a proper approach to this. Have a proper recognition of Aboriginal people within the Constitution, and having all Australians be supportive of it. They are supportive of a preamble. They are supportive of removing the race laws. Let's get it right. Let's move forward on it.
And tell me this, why is this constitutional recognition important for Indigenous Australians? What is it symbolic, practically? What is the significance of this?
Well, it's sometimes it's hard to put in words. For me, when people talk about sovereignty, to me, Australia is owned by Aboriginal people. It's our country. We've been here for thousands of years, and no matter what's ever happened in the past and what's happening into the future, it'll always be our country. But we have 22 million other people living here now. We need to work and build the nation together and moving forward. So for Aboriginal people, it's very important. You know, and the Prime Minister mentioned about the saying the word apology and sorry to the Aboriginal people. Well, that wasn't to all Aboriginal people. That was to the stolen generation. But there was every Aboriginal person felt that. I was in the Parliament that day. I had tears running down my face. It was very emotional. It was very strong for us. For the first time in my life, I felt like a full Australian within the community here. This is another step in that right direction. It acknowledges the great history that all Australians share, the 40,000 years of Aboriginal history and Torres Strait Islander history, the languages, the culture, and how we can build together a really strong nation.
Warren Mundine, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you very much, David.